Center is a place that calls people to a higher purpose and aims to inspire service to others. Laura and I believe that to whom much is given, much is required. This is the spirit that guides our work.
The Bush Center is warm and welcoming. Built on the campus of SMU, my alma mater, we invite visitors through our doors to attend public programming that attracts newsmakers and thought leaders for important conversations around the issues we care most about.
The Bush Center is a unique asset. Having a presidential center and an institute combined is something that differentiates us from most places around the country. We're able to go where other people cannot go and access resources that other people can't access. When we talk, people listen. And when we invite, they come. And when we take on a project, we finish it.
When you walk into the Bush Institute, you'll see a quote from my presidency on the wall that summarizes the principles we're committed to. It is important that we continue to defend these beliefs.
We do that through our 3 impact centers: domestic excellence, global leadership, and our engagement agenda. Domestic excellence. To be a great country, you should have strong economic growth, great education, take care of your veterans, and develop future leaders. In global leadership, it means promoting global health, advancing freedom and democracy, and empowering women worldwide. And our engagement agenda is how we spread the word about what principled leadership is and the core values we're able to perpetuate.
The Bush Institute is making a profound difference in the world. The reason is pretty simple. We don't just do policy and research, we put it into action. Through the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, we're training rising leaders across the country. Through the work we do on school leadership, where we work with district officials across the country to recruit, retain high-performing principals in our schools. We're helping post-9/11 veterans and their families find employment through our VET Roadmap. We've also created the Warrior Wellness Alliance, a network of organizations that represent over 1 million veterans to address the invisible wounds of war and connect more veterans to quality care.
We wanted the Bush Institute to be a place that improved the lives of people at home and around the world. We teach young leaders from emerging democracies the skills they need to help their countries succeed. We equip women from Afghanistan and the Middle East, North Africa region with the knowledge required to become effective leaders. And we continue to ensure that women in Africa who are surviving HIV/AIDS are not dying from cervical cancer.
Following the example set by President and Mrs. Bush, these early results inspire us to do more and to help more people.
We bring people to this great campus and this great facility, but also online through our publications and thought-provoking journals. We're able to carry the messages around principled leadership and what President Bush's example means to all of us.
Having the Bush Center here is really the crown jewel of the campus. Everyone associated with SMU is extremely proud of it.
The value of the George W. Bush Presidential Center to Dallas and North Texas, outside the state of Texas, is truly incalculable.
With SMU, we've hosted conversations with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and with business leaders like Jeff Bezos. Our policy programs benefit from the minds and interests of SMU faculty and students.
My hope is that the Bush Center will always serve as a place where timeless principles are celebrated, protected, and promoted. We just want to make sure the next 10 years are as great as the beginning years of what we're doing here.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of the George W. Bush Presidential Center, Ken Hirsch.
Good morning, and welcome to day 2, and to all those here and those who are joining us on the live stream. The goal of the forum, as we've talked about, is to recognize and celebrate leadership in all its forms. And as you saw also, we're able to put on the same stage with wonderful global thought leaders, the fantastic staff and institute thought leaders that we have here at the Bush Center. The Bush Institute has really matured since this building opened in 5 years, and the body of work that we're producing and the leadership that we're working with is really inspiring, and it makes it a joy for me to come to work and cheer this great team on. As you also saw, that the support that we get from all of you, as well as from the people around this country, gives us an extra stride in our step to make sure that we're always living up to those high expectations. Yesterday, we highlighted the path of some really great leaders. We started talking about women, education reform, the economic challenges, and some of the inspirational stories around how we balance the transformations and foundations in the discussions of our day. Last night was an absolutely inspiring conversation to end the evening with Arthur Brooks and Secretary Condoleezza Rice. And if you ever could have an image of what true leadership and true inspiration is, that dinner conversation was it. I couldn't even sleep last night because it was so, I was just replaying all of the wonderful conversation in my head. Today, this lineup is equally inspiring, and it's exciting for me to stand here and welcome the folks today. But before I do, I want to again reference something that was in the Oval Office when President Bush served, and it's also in the replica of the Oval Office here, which symbolizes, I think, the spirit of what we want to communicate today. There was a painting that was in the Oval Office by Tom Lee, and it was on loan from the El Paso Museum. And it was a painting of the Franklin Mountains outside of El Paso with the morning sun coming up behind them. And President Bush often drew people to that painting when they visited the Oval Office and talked about what it meant. And there was a quote that he would tell people about when they entered the Oval Office and looked at this painting. And it was a quote from Tom Lee, who said, "Sarah and I lived on the east side of our mountain. It's the sunrise side, not the sunset side. It's the side to see the day that is coming and not the day that is gone. It's the best day is the day that's coming, with work to do, our eyes wide open, and our heart grateful." That's the optimistic message of leadership, and it's so symbolized in one painting in one office. Our Presidential Center is about that sense of optimism, and as we develop leaders and advance policy and take action, it's important for us to connect with and to help foster the developments and the connections with the next generation. I don't think millennials are lazy. They may be a little different, but they're not lazy. And today we have an absolutely inspirational program brought to you in conjunction with our own Barbara Bush to really highlight some great work from the next generation of leaders. To get us started, as we said, we'd like to highlight people who've run through our programs and people who we've been honored to interact with. And the first is Holly Gordon. Holly Gordon was a 2015 graduate of our Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. And she's the founder of an organization called Girls Rising, a global campaign for girls' education. And now she's the Chief Impact Officer at Participant Media, where she oversees campaigns around inspiring and compelling social change. It's an honor to hand the stage to Holly Gordon.
Good morning, everyone. It's hard for me to believe that it's been just 3 years since I pressed submit on my Presidential Leadership Scholars application. At the time, I was coming off my own leadership journey, building a global campaign for girls' education called Girl Rising, and I felt as though I had a lot to learn about leadership. It wasn't that anything had gone wrong with Girl Rising. In fact, along with my team, we had raised millions of dollars, created a documentary that ended up in the top 100 box office of all time, and engineered a campaign to bring our message of girls' education and empowerment to hundreds of millions of people all around the world. But what was not obvious was that despite 10 years of training as a producer at ABC News, building Girl Rising was, for me, mostly terrifying. Every day, I felt as though I was living on the cusp of failure, because it turns out that journalism doesn't prepare you for much in the real world, other than asking questions. So that's what I did. And I had to start with the basics. How do you write a PowerPoint? How do you create a strategic plan? How do you ask for money? How do you take a corporate meeting? How do you ask for money in a corporate meeting? I was learning at a breakneck pace, and as the project grew, I felt wholly unprepared for the weight and loneliness of the responsibility I was carrying. Something I shared only with my husband in the dark of night, tears streaming into my pillow. So by the time I was applying to PLS, I figured if I was ever going to have the chance to lead again, I better learn from the pros. Everything about PLS sounded amazing. 6 months of learning about leadership through the experiences of 4 presidents, alongside 60 people drawn from across sectors, all of whom are dedicated to tackling today's biggest challenges in their communities around the world. It sounds awesome, doesn't it? Well, I'm here to tell you it was 1,000 times better than that. I often describe it as coming to the end of a long desert journey and discovering a waterfall and drinking and drinking and drinking in great, big, thirsty gulps. The frameworks and strategies that were shared with us by some of the best business school professors across the country today, not to mention the wisdom and experiences that the presidents themselves shared, along with their key advisors, turned my own gut feeling journey into something with shape and form and cohesiveness. I knew that I had the tools, were I ever to be lucky to lead again, to do it a bit better. But that's not the most important thing that happened. The most important thing was I met 59 other people who I discovered are the kind of leaders that President Bush and President Clinton are. Servant leaders, guided by principles and values, creative, courageous, collaborative, compassionate, and kind. What I learned that my cohort had in common with the presidents themselves and within each other was the understanding that the more you learn about an issue, the more you realize you simply don't know that much. And so curiosity is often more important in leadership than being right. What I learned from PLS was that leadership is understanding that having a vision of the future and being able to step into that uncertainty between what is now and what is not yet. And having the ability to bring others along with you on that vision, and then the willingness to collaborate together and work hard to make that vision right and come true. That, it turns out, is what the State of the Union is all about. Through PLS, I met my first helicopter pilot, my first jet fighter, my first Mississippi gun owner, and my first evangelical preacher. And it turns out that these 2 are my closest PLS friends. Guns and church. It's amazing what this member of the New York media elite had to learn from my PLS brethren. So if you need to know something about healthcare policy or education reform or conservation, I can hook you up. I have an amazing network of humans who care about progress, are into collaboration, and who are trying to make the world a better place, not for themselves, but for others, which is just as well for me. I am extraordinarily grateful because just 4 months ago, I started a new job at Participant Media as the Chief Impact Officer. Participant is a film company started by Jeff Skoll, whose vision is to accelerate social change through storytelling. It's a lot like the vision of Girl Rising, so for me, this is a dream job. Participant has made movies like Hine Me Malala, Spotlight, Waiting for Superman. And as I prepared for the job, I started to watch all of Participant's movies. And as I did so, I had an epiphany. You could mistake Hine Me Malala for a story about girls' education, or Spotlight for a film about investigative journalism. But in fact, they are both stories of leadership. All of our stories are stories of leadership, of everyday citizens who stand up to advocate for a future that's better than what we have today. They are also stories about how hard leadership is, that if you're going to be a leader, you must Be ready for people to dismiss you, ignore you, maybe even try to kill you. And yet, day after day, you will stand up and fight for a world that's more prosperous, safer, more equitable, more peaceful. PLS is doing important work. And in my new role at Participant Media, I am dedicated to the idea of empowering, inspiring, and supporting servant leaders. And here's why. When I think of the future of the tens and millions of people who will be coming online in the next decades, and I think of the fragmentation of our national identities and borders, I believe now more than ever we have the opportunity, even the necessity, to be investing in humble, curious, passionate servant leaders. I think of the kids who led the March for Our Lives a few weeks ago, or the young people on the next panel that includes my friend Diana Mao from PLS. When I look at this audience, I see a room full of leaders, and I hope to have the opportunity to work with many of you. What is it that Margaret Mead said? Never underestimate the power of a small group of committed citizens to change the world. You are among that small group. So thank you, President and Mrs. Bush, for having me today, and thanks to all of you for listening. I look forward to being in touch.
Please welcome the Western Region President of Northern Trust, Stephen R. Bell.
Good morning. Morning. Quick show of hands. How many in the audience were born 1975 or after? The next generation. You might be wondering why a guy with salt hair is opening the Bush Institute's Next Generation Game Changer Forum. The reason is actually quite simple. I am Northern Trust's youngest employee. Actually, like you, perspective and attitude matters. Northern Trust is extremely proud of our affiliation with the Bush Institute, and particularly the 43 Club. With over 200 members, the 43 Club engages and connects emerging leaders with stimulating conversation, providing exposure to today's political and social policies, inspiring the next generation to serve. As wealth management advisors, Northern Trust helps our clients preserve and grow wealth. A characteristic we admire about our clients and supporters of the Bush Institute is intellectual curiosity. Lifelong learning is fundamental to personal growth. All of you Next Gen here exhibit an innate inquisitiveness that feeds on insights shared by great minds featured over the 3-day forum here, including Ben Bernanke, Hank Paulson, and Condoleezza Rice. Take the time to wander in their footsteps and understand their remarkable journeys. The workplace of today represents a spectrum of ages and experiences. Of note, the symbiotic relationship between the next gen and my generation highlights two conclusions. First, my generation's test of leadership is defined by our handoff to the next generation. Interestingly, the young are teaching the old. In fact, our new normal is reverse mentoring. About 18 months ago, my region adopted a next-gen discipline to build brand awareness for a generation of prospective clients, client children, and market influencers. We handed over the ownership of the initiative to our youngest partners, and they ran with it. During the rollout, our next-gen employees flexed new muscles in planning, business development, client coaching, and even as speakers. It was groundbreaking in terms of how we are allocating resources and human capital. Our next gen, no surprise, did not disappoint. Now their strategies serve as a catalyst for a larger scale next gen approach nationwide, and they are moving forward to develop version 2.0. The second conclusion: the next gen need to take their prized pupil role seriously. Transferring knowledge is a gift. Take advantage of the intangible wisdom my generation is so eager to share. Understand our missteps, our attempts to course correct. Ask, listen, and absorb. How you are anchored in life makes a difference. The next gen today is nurturing a growth mindset. You next geners are warriors and protectors of both the world you inhabit and the people who surround you. Your leadership is causing a chain reaction. I am so excited about the breakthroughs all of you will make. Before I conclude, I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to pay tribute to Barbara Bush. In homes, community centers, and boardrooms alike, she was considered a world-class figure who lived an impeccable life of dignity and devotion. Now I have the great opportunity to introduce our panel of Next Geners today. Join me in welcoming the panelists of this morning's program. First, James Kasaga Aranatwe, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder, Teach for Uganda. Diana Mao, President and co-founder, Know My Network. Jonathan Swanson, co-founder and president, Thumbtack. He just bought that jacket yesterday because he didn't own one. I thought that was great. Daniela Terminel, Chief Executive Officer, Global Health Corps. And moderating the panel is Barbara Bush, co-founder and board chair of Global Health Corps.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Steve, and thank you to Holly. We are so thrilled that we get to speak after her. All the themes that she mentioned, like grit and resiliency and problem solving, are embodied by our panelists this morning, which is our next gen panel. But I don't know if y'all know this, by next year, millennials will take over baby boomers in terms of the largest living adult population. And in 10 years, Gen Xers will take over baby boomers as the largest adult living population. So while they're next gen, I'd say they're pretty current gen right now too. And we have incredible entrepreneurs and leaders on our panel. All of them grew up in a connected age with technological and scientific breakthroughs. And they're each solving very different challenges: global health and leadership development, education, entrepreneurship, and human trafficking. So please join me in welcoming our incredible panelists. And two other quick shout outs. Diana is also a PLS scholar. And James is a Global Health Corps alum. Yeah. So to get started, I was hoping that each of y'all could share more about your leadership journey. Danny, how did you end up doing what you're doing? Why do you do it? And what problem are you trying to solve?
Absolutely. No, I was born and raised in Mexico City. And after a few years of trying to find out what my professional path would be like, I came across this organization called Endeavor. And at the time, they were trying to identify entrepreneurs, help them grow, and have them be the catalyzers of the creation of new entrepreneurial ecosystems. And that sounded great, but the problem was that the word entrepreneur didn't exist in Mexico. Like mentors, I had to ask a friend, like, what is a mentor? Because it was not a figure that we had. And of course, working in a nonprofit was like volunteering. It was just unthinkable that you could do, have a living and do good. But of course, I was like, sounds great, let's do it, right? And that's where I realized that all of us have the power to help someone and the power of that someone to multiply their effect. In 2004, the word entrepreneur was not in the vocabulary of the Mexican people. And if you fast forward until now, Mexico is one of the most vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems in Latin America, receiving investments from Silicon Valley investors, worldwide support. And more incredible, when I was there, being part of driving policy, it was not a thing. It was just impossible to do it. The problems that we had with the government were just too far from us. And just a couple of months ago, there was a fintech law that was approved. And this fintech law was driven by entrepreneurs. So when I think about systems change, I have to say that I lived it. I was part of that system change, and I know that a relatively few people had a disproportionate impact in creating this system. And in 2010, when I joined Endeavor in New York, I had the opportunity to see this systematic change in places like Lebanon, Argentina, Turkey, which makes me, super excited when I heard and when I started to get to know Global Health Corps. Because it will happen. It is happening, and James is a living proof of that. But systems change when we invest in the right people and help them be strong leaders. And so I want to change the world. I started with entrepreneurs. Now it's with health, and then who knows, right? But that's what I want to do. I want to change the world one person at a time.
Awesome. James, I'd love to hear about your leadership journey. And this week is a very important week for me in terms of thinking about grandmothers. And I know you had a very special figure in your life that was your grandmother. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about her role in your journey as well.
Thank you, Barbara. Don't start me with tears because grandmothers mean the world to me. First of all, I would be remiss by not saying that it's an honor and privilege for me to be on this stage. In fact, come to think of it, it would be impossible for me to be here without my grandmother, without an education that I've had. Imagine a young boy growing up in Western Uganda, the first school that you went to, you were barefooted, 10 miles away from home. Your mom is a primary school teacher, your father is a farmer. By 4 years old, I see 4 years old, I see 2 coffins go out of my home. It's my sisters have passed away with measles. And I look at my mother, she's not the same, and I ask, where are they going? She said, the first concept, she said, they are going to heaven. That was my first concept of heaven. Fast forward, 2 years later, she passes away with cancer. I was 6 years old. And so fast forward, after that, 4 years later, my dad passes away with HIV and AIDS. I'm a survivor of 7, and I was raised by my grandmother, who really never gave up on me because she knew very well that what my mother had said, she said, the only way you will ever navigate this world is by the use of your pen. The pen will be the compass for you to navigate this world. And it's incredible to know that a kid who climbed cactus trees, and I would dream of what the world would look like without my parents, without anybody except my grandmother, here I am standing in front of you sharing my story. And so grandmothers mean the world to me. And when I had the news of Barbara, who my great friend is named after, I was emotional because I met Barbara on my journey. So 3 turning points I would share and how Barbara came into my life. One, the turning point of my grandmother never giving up on me to get get a primary education. At 11 years old, I made a journey of 500 miles on a bus by myself to ask the president of my country to allow me to go to high school. And after I got the scholarship, it took me 3 months. Other kids were already in school, but finally I landed in front of the first lady. I never met the president. The first lady said, I can't turn you away because I had done well in my county. I was the best student and given a high school scholarship. Fast forward later, I end up in college in the United States by American parents. So that's another turning point for me. Someone yesterday mentioned like the turning points of our lives. And after my college education, I realized that I wanted to do something that will ensure that kids in my country will never go through the same challenges that I've gone through to get an education. And so I saw an application saying we are looking for young leaders who will change the face of global health. And I knew that the word young leader was so attractive to me, and I applied to be a Global Health Corps fellow. I worked with Barbara in New York, and then I ended up going back to Uganda. And then when I was in Uganda, I remember I saw the challenges after visiting my grandmother, and I realized that 70%, 7 out of 10 kids never make it to secondary school. Mind you, these are the kids that are just like me, orphaned, being raised by a single mother or single mom, and so a single parent. And so I told Barbara, thanks for the great leadership that you taught me, the self, the community, the serving others. I want to take this and create Teach for Uganda and ensure that every Ugandan child has an opportunity of an excellent education. So Barbara and your grandmother and the literacy advocate that she was, connected with my grandmother and who you are, I don't know, it's an emotional week, but also it's a celebration week to know that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants as we speak.
Thank you, James.
I don't want to have to follow this guy.
Jonathan, why don't you tell us about Thumbtack? And if you have a great grandma story, you can throw that in too.
So I grew up in the Midwest, went out east for school, studied philosophy and economics, and I was a political junkie. And since I was a little kid, I dreamed that one day I could work for the president's economic advisors, which is maybe a little dorky of a dream, but I got to do it right out of school. I worked for President Bush's economic team, 2006 to 2009, and as our time in the White House was coming to a close, I spoke to my boss, Al Hubbard, to ask for some advice. He's a former entrepreneur before he entered public service, and I said, hey, I would love to start my own business one day. What do you think? I got his advice, and he really encouraged and supported me, and so I jumped in and did it. And with a couple co-founders, we just started dreaming, and we said, we want to have the biggest impact in the world we can. We want to build something that impacts 1 billion plus people. So let's find a problem that impacts 1 billion plus people. And so we brainstormed lots of ideas, had lots of dumb ideas, but we kept coming back to local services as this really big part of the world. It's how billions of people hire local services, hundreds of millions of people provide local services like a handyman or DJ or dog walker. The more we looked at it, the more it seemed really big, really important, but also so old. The way we hire local services hadn't changed in my lifetime. And in contrast to that, we saw how Jeff Bezos was transforming the way we buy products. And we wanted to do that same thing for local services. And so we started Thumbtack almost a decade ago now with a mission of helping people hire the right professional for all of life's projects. So whether you need a handyman for your home, a DJ for a party like this, and a tutor for a child, we can help you hire 1,000 different types of professionals. And our mission for small businesses is to help anyone with a skill start and run their own small business. And so we've been through all the ups and downs of the startup journey. You know, just a few years after we started, we had just a team of 5 people, not many customers, had trouble signing up small business owners. We were actually working out of a house for a number of years. We had so little space in this house, I actually lived in a closet for 2 years. So I was not figuratively, but literally coming out of the closet every morning. And, you know, when we first went to raise fundraising, we really struggled, and we had some hard times, almost ran out of money. But we stuck in there, and fast forward today, we've now raised $273 million from investors like Sequoia and Google Capital, have a team of over 1,000 in the United States and around the world. And most importantly, we're now helping hundreds of thousands of people start and run their own small business. The small businesses on Thumbtack are earning over $1 billion a year on our platform. It's something we're really proud of. We think one of the most powerful ways you can impact a person in a community's life is giving someone a good job that they're proud of, that gives them meaning. And we've done that to a few 100,000 people in the United States, but it's our dream to bring that to tens of millions all around the world.
And Diana, I'd love for you to tell us more about your leadership journey and what led you to end up founding Know Me Network.
Absolutely. Yeah, so my leadership journey started at a young age. I grew up at the age of 15 volunteering in garbage villages in Egypt, as well as orphanages in Mexico through my church and then through university. But hearing Barbara and James talk about their grandma reminds me of my grandma. She's actually now 103 years old.
Wow.
Living in California with my parents. And she, I remember, would invite homeless people she would meet at this supermarket to our home for Thanksgiving dinner. And then she would also, she was on the board of her church, and I remember as a child following her into a board meeting and doodling and pretending that I was taking notes at the board meeting. So fast forward, I ended up going to UC Santa Barbara for economics and then entering the business world towards business consulting. And what brought me to Cambodia in 2007 was a microfinance research fellowship through NYU, and it was there that I, in order to get to the village, had to go take a car, take a moped, and then walk through muck with leeches to get to the villages where we were serving microfinance clients. And in a village, I never forget the moment, a single father with 7 children, after we interviewed him, offered my male colleague his youngest daughter in his broken English, "You like her, you take her." And at that moment, I was horrified and looked him in the eye, and I could tell he really didn't want to give her up, but it was out of desperation, out of really believing that perhaps my male colleague could offer a better life. And in that moment, I also thought about my own father, who grew up very privileged in China, but because of communism, his family was persecuted and because of their affluence and faith. And so he ended up not going to college and being thrown in labor camp. And also he, remember telling me stories that he would grind up leaves and cook the leaves to eat because the country was starving. And so thinking about him and how I could have been born into that circumstance, and I could have been that girl, but thankfully I was blessed to grow up in the United States and under a nurturing family, as well as just a social system that was working, where I was not vulnerable. So I put myself in her shoes, and at that moment, immediately, I was like, much is given, much is required, and I decided to just start learning about the issue. So fast forward, I started an organization that provides training and job opportunities for survivors and women at risk of human trafficking, and we reached kind of a point of, we're doing the work on the ground, making a great impact. And in 2015, I had the honor of joining Presidential Leadership Scholars and learning firsthand from President Bush and other presidents about large-scale change and really the art and science of leadership, as well as how to influence systems. And so now we have a partnership with Vodafone to scale our curriculum and digitalize it and turn it into an app, as well as Sephora, creating market access for women in Cambodia through our fashion school. So it's been a long journey.
That is amazing. So Jonathan and Diana touched on this a little bit. Y'all are each solving problems that are not new problems, but you both spoke about how your models are approaching them differently. And Danny and James, I was wondering if you could tell us about how Global Health Corps, Teach for Uganda, how you're approaching solving global health issues or education in a way that might not have traditionally been done in the space you're working in.
Yeah, totally. I think that when we think about complex problems, it's difficult to think that there's going to be a simple solution. Right? When there's a systematic problem, we need to approach it in a systematic way and get different perspectives, different approaches to try to solve and change things from within. And that's exactly what we do at Global Health Corps, as you know. We really focus on bringing people like James that have different backgrounds, different experiences, and we place them with a co-fellow. So there's always a national and an international. And that is very intentional, because that allows them not only to share their experiences throughout the year, but also to grow in the leadership path in terms of empathy, understanding where everyone is coming from, what are things not working here, what are the things that don't work there that can work somewhere else. So I think that for years, all the clinical and the medical and the health system has been driven by traditionally white, male, Western people that have done great, great advances, all the medicines that already exist, all the research that is already there. But I truly believe that to solve this problem, we need to bring diversity. We need to bring different perspectives, and we need to bring different skills. Mm-hmm. We have the medicines. We are not delivering them in the right time at the right moment. That is not a problem for a doctor to solve. It's for an expert in supply chain. You know, we have the treatment for diseases, but we don't know who's getting it, and we're not being able to deliver that. That is not just a doctor's or a nurse or a medical problem. So the way that we are attacking this problem is by connecting the dots. Why are we not delivering this that we already have? And when you think there are millions of people dying because they don't have access to a pill, then something is really broken. And we need to have these very diverse, action-driven problem solvers seated in the field to change it from within. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's a long-term bet, but I think that we're in the right path, and it's only by having this multi-system approach or multi-skill approach that I think that we have the hope to change it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, because we all know that everything rises and falls with leadership. For us at Teach for Uganda, we look at it as the deficit of leadership in our country. We have a fellowship program based on the Global Health Corps model of, though Global Health Corps is 1 year, ours is a 2-year fellowship. Basically, we look at two things: leadership and effective teaching, right? So a teacher as a leader, and for most parts, this has been done. Sometimes the solutions exist, but we don't actually use them. So Teach for America has existed, the impact is known. Then Teach for India came up, Teach for the UK. There are now over 50 across the world. There are just 3 in Africa, and we are the first in East Africa. So Teach for Nigeria and Teach for Ghana. The idea that you could get the top of our college graduates who are smart, who know the needs of their countries, and inspire them to go and serve in their countries. These are young people that, you know, would run to a bank, or they would run to, you know, a telecom company. But you're saying, I'm requesting you to give us 2 years to ensure that, you know, a Barbara or a James gets an opportunity just as you've had. And so in our first cohort of 16, we have former college presidents, student body presidents who are coming on. These are young man who wants to one day run for president. We have a young lady who was a banker in bringing in millions in loans, and she realized that, you know, when I go out there to give loans to these women in agriculture, they were just using their, you know, thumbs to sign for the loans. And she said, really? I want to have a generation in the next 20 years where women do not just agree to sign up on a loan, but read what is in the loan paper. And I want to join Teach for Uganda as a fellow to extend that literacy. Thanks to, when I hear literacy, I remember Barbara's grandma. Literacy is important, and she mentioned it. She said that if we can get every kid to read and write and comprehend, we can solve, you know, crime. We can solve economic challenges. We can solve, you know, health. I mean, health. Think about the kids that we are giving a quality education in our communities, that they can be able to make better health choices, nutritional choices for their kids and for the generations to come. I mean, I always think that if it wasn't for my mother, who was a primary school teacher who wanted me to go to school and then left that mantle to my grandmother, I probably wouldn't be here. And so the idea that we are selecting the best and brightest of our countries and inspiring them, teaching them to be effective teachers, number one, to be great community leaders, number two, to have the empathy, the courage, the adaptability to live in those communities and inspire this next generation to seek out and realize that education is the only opportunity. I think that's where we are going. And the solutions exist, but it's just like they are now starting to be shareable, and that's what we are doing right now.
Excellent. So our panel is on leadership, even though we're next gen. And I remember in elementary school thinking leadership was like a man with like a tri-corner hat on being like, go north. And turns out that's not leadership. So I was wondering, Diana, do you mind sharing, as you've built your work, how do you approach leadership? What does leadership mean to you now? And if you have an example of anyone you've worked with that embodies that, can you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. I think leadership continues to change and evolve over time. So depending on circumstance, country by country, but the core value and character of a person really will shape good leaders versus bad leaders. And for me, I've learned so much through actually one of my co-founders who lives in Cambodia, but at the time, just what she taught me about leadership, servant leadership. So just long story short, we operate in an area where there's a strong, heavy caste system in northern India. And so when we first started through a grant from the State Department in 2012, through the TIP office, which I know President Bush was instrumental in setting up, so thank you. So we had a grant where we were tasked with training survivors of human trafficking and also visiting them. So me and my co-founder, we were there in 2012 visiting brothel to brothel for 3 months and sharing about what we were offering to the women. And so I went back to New York, and she was there developing the curriculum, and we didn't have infrastructure yet set up in terms of someone to help with the office maintenance and janitorial services. So we had asked all of our program participants and staff to rotate in terms of cleaning the restroom. But there's a different caste dedicated to that. So no one would clean it, and literally it was just a filthy mess, leaking odor. And she was like, oh my gosh. So she picked up and took 2 hours and scrubbed the whole restroom down. And meanwhile, all the women gathered around her. There was so much commotion, like, you know, what is she doing? She's seen as a higher caste or perceived as higher caste. Some women started crying because they were so touched. And then at that moment, from that moment forward, we had no problems with the restroom duties. And it just taught me the power of servant leadership, but also now at our board, at our advisory board meetings, at our staff meetings, we always ask the question, are you willing to clean the toilet? That is the key question. And then second, just the women are now leading by example. They're gathering, forming bonds, and putting social pressure on institutions and legal systems that put them down. For example, not being able to get access to a bank account application. For example, murder cases, not being given a fair trial, and mobilizing and really putting pressure now through the training and through her example.
That is awesome. So walking the walk. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on leadership now that you're in a leadership position?
Yeah, to me, leadership is about helping people reach their potential, right? For the president, that's helping the citizens in our country reach their potential. You know, for me, my mission's a little bit smaller than that, but it's similar. It's helping my employees and our small businesses reach their potential. And I think the way you help people reach their potential is doing two things. One, you push and challenge people to do more than they've done in the past, but you also give them the support and encouragement at the same time so they feel safe. And so every time someone joins Thumbtack as a new employee, I tell them, I'm going to push and challenge you more than you've ever been pushed and challenged in your life, but I'm also going to give you more support than you've ever had. I'm going to have your back. And I think that combination really creates an environment for people to thrive and to have personal and professional breakthroughs. And my favorite story of example of this at Thumbtack is this woman named Mikan. She was the first person I hired on our team in the Philippines, the first year actually we started Thumbtack. And Mikan grew up in poverty in Manila. Her dad earned $2 a day. She did not come from privilege. When I first interviewed her on a video screen, she told me one day she wanted to finish college and go get her MBA. And it broke my heart a little bit hearing her say that because it seemed a little unrealistic almost. You know, a girl like her couldn't even get a visa to visit the United States. But she had this drive and this fire in her eyes and this just raw potential. And so we partnered up, and I said, hey, Mikan, I'm going to push and challenge you more than you've ever been, but I'm going to also give you lots of support. And she went from an individual contributor on our team in the Philippines to a manager of 10, to a director of a team of 100, to a general manager of a team of 500. This woman had never managed a person in her life, but she had that raw potential. And it wasn't without its struggles, right? She had crises of confidence. We shared tears more than once over hard situations, having to let go of someone or a team. But we had each other's back, and you know, while she did all the hard work, I got to be a partner in that, and I got to see her have these breakthroughs. And for me, you know, the business side of Thumbtack is very intellectually challenging and interesting, but it's that personal side of getting to help people really reach the potential that's certainly the most meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. James, what are your thoughts on leadership? Again, now that you're in a leadership titled position, but I'd say you have a leadership mindset since you were probably 7.
Yeah, I think for me, really, I see it as a journey of discovering what really you want to leave your legacy on. I mean, I look at it as an opportunity to see a challenge that exists in front of you and having the ability or the audacity or the courage to attempt to solve it. As you know, my journey, there were many challenges placed in front of me, but somehow I don't know how, either through my grandmother, through people that stood in my way that gave me that courage that I could take the next bus, and maybe at the end of the tunnel there will be some light. And so I see leadership as a journey of discovery, one, realizing there's a challenge here in this community, there's a challenge in our country, and how do I take part? How do I become part of the solution? And that's the courage. You take the courageous step to get there. It's not easy, but at least you take the courage. And then the other piece for me that I see, and I see this in our fellows now in the communities, to realize and have the humility to know that I cannot do it alone. Mm-hmm. And when we first bring them into the fellowship, they first be like, yeah, we are going to change everything. We're going to make sure the kids are going to come to school and they will get straight A's. And now, 3 months down the road, man, they come back to us. They're like, this is so hard. Some of them want to quit. Thankfully, no one has quit yet. But from our coach, they want to quit. I mean, teaching 100 kids who are hungry, they come 10 miles to school, they are rowdy, it's difficult. So they are realizing now that if I want to make change, if I want to make an impact, I have the humility to realize that I need to work with religious leaders, with the parents, with the teachers in the school, with the head teachers, with the health workers to ensure that this child, all those challenges that are stopping them from coming to school, excited to learn, are stopped so that I can focus on their learning outcomes is most important, that humility. And then the other piece is really the ability to be able to continuously learn. One of our core values is a culture of learning because unfortunately, when I look at the world and the challenges that we have, especially in Africa, is that sometimes our leaders stop to learn, to understand that the world is changing so fast. Uganda is 80% under 30. So 40 million people, 80% are under 30. Median age is 15. So we have a young generation that is hungry to learn and to grow very fast. And then we have a leadership sometimes that never really connects. And so for me, my hope is that we grow a generation of leaders who are willing to learn and to challenge themselves to learn from the next generation. And I love that here you are giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Awesome. And Ms. Daniela, what are your thoughts on leadership, and do you have a story to share that demonstrates that from your work?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's not too different, right, than what has been said. I really think that has two phases. One is your leadership as a person, and then is your collective leadership. right? I truly believe that we need to be grounded in our values. I think that throughout your life, it's very easy to be pulled to different ways and different sides. And I think that really keeping on what is true to you and what you believe is important. Of course, self-awareness, developing humility, and all these characteristics. But values for me is really key. But then, of course, you're part of a community, right? And you want to have more impact. And for me, that is also about this phrase of, I don't shine if you don't shine.
Who said that phrase?
It's actually a very, very deep philosopher. No, it's the Killers, a music band. Because I don't shine if you don't shine. Put your back on me, put your back on me, right? And I really think it is for me super important, because one is, if I by myself, I'm not going to accomplish anything. If I'm surrounded by people and people grow and are better than me, then we're going to accomplish something, right? And if we get our backs and we are all together going to the same direction, then it's going to be easier to get there. So for me, leadership is about those two pieces. And one example that I really like from our fellows, of course, the first one is James, but another story that I like is this pair of co-fellows that they had a engineer background. One of them was working at the Gap on supply chain. So his work was pretty much making sure that there were jeans your size in the store that you wanted to buy your jeans. And there was this other person that was in Tanzania, and he was working with the biggest cell phone company. And in Tanzania, everyone has access to a cell phone, and his work was to make sure that everyone had the cell phone right where they needed it. So both of them were placed in the Ministry of Health. And their job became to, instead of making sure that the people had jeans or had cell phones, that they had the right medicines. And they were able to, together, figure out how to navigate the Ministry of Health with a lot of resilience, right? Because it was definitely not easy. But what is more exciting and talks to me a lot about this collective leadership is that they decided to stay on what they were doing, right? And one is now leading the supply chain for the Ministry of Health. And the other one is in Liberia and went there to help on the Ebola crisis and brought more people to help on the systems. And I really think that is a great example of leadership. First, on individual leadership, on how they were able to work together on a project, on a year project, and then how they were able to be part of something bigger, right? Each of them be part of something bigger, which I think that we all can be, and we should all aim to do so.
Awesome, thank you. So I'd love to talk about technology now. I know technology is something that our generation is defined as focusing on, and obviously Jonathan has started a tech platform. I'm curious, in y'all's work, does technology help you, and is anything lost in terms of using technology? And I'd love to start with you, Diana.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this day and age, I feel like it really helps cut transaction costs. So for example, we Skype, Vimeo with our field staff, and we're able to do that on a weekly basis and still feel like it's an in-person meeting, so that kind of the gap, the distance gap is shortened. And then also with our app, I think technology really has immense potential to scale solutions that are working. So for example, turning our curriculum into an app and making it open source to communities where they're unreachable in the sense less than $1 a day, no infrastructure, lack of electricity and running water. To be able to reach people there and decrease the cost is huge, because that's currently why they're not being reached. And then in terms of some of the challenges, I know with our generation, we often get, I think the common kind of thought is that millennials are taking selfies and self-absorbed. And I do admit that a lot of my friends at dinner will be tweeting instead of talking. So that is definitely, I feel, a problem in the world of anti-human trafficking, where for me, it was about the human-to-human interaction with the two girls that I met in Cambodia. And so if I hadn't met them and had that human-to-human, I'm not sure I would have taken action. So those are sort of my takeaways.
Thank you. What about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, I don't think technology is inherently good or bad. I think it is a tool that can be used for good or bad. And in certain contexts, it definitely has inclinations or predilections, right? And in the corporate setting, I think modern communication tools are incredibly empowering to employees. Employees have more of a voice than they've ever had. For example, there's this new app in Silicon Valley that allows employees to chat anonymously within a company. So if you work at Thumbtack, you can download this app and you enter a chat room and you can ask questions anonymously. And so when we do raises, I'll sometimes peek in there to see what people are saying. And you see people saying, hey, I got a raise for this much. How much did other people get a raise for? Or, Jonathan announced a promotion, someone to director. What do people think of this person? And I think that transparency certainly adds a harsher spotlight on leadership. But it makes our leaders so much better. And it challenges us to have better answers, right? And if someone says, why did one person get a raise and not another? You should absolutely have a good reason for that. You should have a philosophy behind it. You should have a process that's non-biased to make sure the best are getting raises in the right way. And so I think that transparency can be a little scary sometimes, but makes us all better. And one of the ways we've taken this even further at Thumbtack is many people are familiar with 360 reviews, where you get peer reviews on your strengths and weaknesses, and you look over that feedback with your manager. We do that at Thumbtack. Our leadership team does it. But we actually take our peer reviews as leaders, and then we publish it to the whole company. And I tell the leadership team, this is like us getting naked in front of the company. People see all your strengths, all your weaknesses, but it's immensely powerful because people know, we're working on things just like we ask them to work on things. And the truth is, no one's surprised. Everyone knows our weaknesses. Everyone knows our strengths. And putting it out there is really clarifying and really powerful because it aligns all of us in this effort for self-improvement.
That's awesome. It's a great idea. Yeah. Thinking about it. James, what about you?
I think quickly for us, technology, we see it as an enabler, being an early stage social enterprise in education in Uganda and working in rural communities where you have no electricity, no clean water. So it's challenging. On our side as an organization, internally, it's an enabler for us to be able to communicate with our field staff easily. It really helps us to get the information that we need. We are looking at ways of how we can pilot in the next year, ways of how to bring, we call it ICT, information communications technology, to our kids in rural areas who the counterparts in the cities have iPads, they are tinkling, they know what's going on. And then the other kids, when you show up with an iPad, it's just like a new world. And so it's something that we are thinking about, and we are looking at companies that can help us, but the cost of getting technology to these kids is high, but it's something that we want our kids also not to be left behind. So it's something we really are thinking about. But internally, as a communications tool, I don't know how I would exist with a 3-people staff without technology, because that's how I do my work. So,
absolutely.
Thank you.
And Danny?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely a fan of technology. I think that technology can be a great enabler and a great tool. But it's also very impressive to me to think that, for example, right now is where we've been the most connected ever, right? It's super easy to text someone in the other side of the world, or, to talk to someone, even to see in a video. But yet, there are some numbers that show, for example, that depression is 10 times more than it was in the 60s, right? Or that peer-to-peer work satisfaction has been decreasing in the last 30 years, every year, right? And that loneliness has increased. 40% of the Americans say they feel lonely now, versus 20% in the 80s. And when you think about it, and to bring some perspective, is depression can reduce your life 20%. Actually, it's obesity. Obesity can reduce your life 20%. Drinking, 30%. Smoking, 50%. And loneliness, 70%. So I think that we need to be very responsible in how do we manage technology. So I think that technology is a great tool, but like everything in life, if we overuse it and we go to the extreme, we are in risk of losing that humanity that brings us together and that is so important as we evolve as leaders.
Agreed. So it is time for our last question. And so for each of our panelists, I'm wondering that in 10 years, when I wake up and I open the newspaper, whatever the newspaper looks like in 10 years, what headline do you hope I'm reading thanks to you and the work of your organization? Daniela, do you want to start?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly would love just to be about sports, because that means that health is not an issue.
So, specifically, what will the headline be?
Maybe it would be like, Malawi and Mexico are playing the final of the World Cup.
Awesome. James?
I think quickly for me, it would to know that we have at least leaders in the Ministry of Education from Teach for Uganda. So maybe the permanent secretary or maybe the state minister for education. I mean, I think it will be incredible, because then I know that my young leaders already are in there to fix the challenges of education in our country for a long time.
Awesome. Jonathan?
Yeah, something we'd be proud of is we read a headline that said, Thumbtack helps small business owners earn $100 billion in a single year. We are on pace to do $1 billion now, but we think the opportunity is not 10, but 100 times bigger. And the world is full of talented people, like people on the stage, like Mikan, who haven't yet reached their potential. And we think if we pull down enough barriers, we can help tens of millions of people start small businesses.
Awesome. Diana?
It's a really good question. It would be Naji Moon, from survivor to entrepreneur to president of India, and Nomi shuts its doors because slavery has been eradicated.
Awesome.
And on the front page, it would be Millennials Rock.
All four of you, Diana, Jonathan, James, and Daniela, thank you for joining us this morning, and please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause.
When I was in the training, it's really, really rich learning for me. We learn so much from democracy and how a systematic democratic country is working and what are the rights people should have. Each part is connected because we learn in lessons in the classroom. But when we go out in the community or even we go into the meeting, we can see, oh, this is what we learned in the book. So this is how they apply the theory here. It's such a great experience. During the LLF training, we have a project management sections. If you want to start a project, where you should start and what are the things you should consider. When I see that children living in poverty and they have no future, I want to do something for them. For my personal leadership project with the Bush Institute, I'm thinking of providing the vocational training for 10 young people. With the skills they learn from the training, they can get a better job opportunities. Before, I don't see myself as a leader, but now I'm confident that I'm a leader, I have the skills, and I can bring positive changes to my community.